Please welcome Laura Marquez, Global Lead for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Policy at Google, and Marie Argilagos, President and CEO, Hispanics and Philanthropy, who will discuss the impacts of philanthropic grants on our communities.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Marquez, and I'm thrilled to be here with you today. I sit on Google's employee engagement team, overseeing our global diversity, equity, and inclusion policy work. And in my previous role, I led our Latino community engagement efforts in support of our larger community. So I'm honored to be here with you today to host a conversation on the role of philanthropy in advancing issues which impact the Latino community. And Google.org, our philanthropic arm, is playing an important role, bringing the best of Google to help solve some of humanity's biggest challenges, combining funding, innovation, and tech expertise to support underserved communities and provide opportunities for everyone. We're proud that .org has committed close to $7 million in grants this year to organizations serving the Latino community. And today, I'm joined by the CEO of one of Google's grantees, Hispanics in Philanthropy. Marie, thank you for joining me here. I'm proud to call you a friend and a partner in these efforts, and it's great to just spend some time with you discussing the impact that investments like these have on our community. So let's kick things off with a quick introduction to HIP. Tell us a little bit about you and your organization.
Thank you, Laura. When they asked me to join and they said who was moderating, I said, yes, sign me up. I was just very excited to be here, not just because of high tech, which I'm so impressed with what high tech is doing, Google.org, you, Laura, an amazing body of work that you have created. And we have a board member, Hector Mojica, who's also with Google, and we just learned so much. So thank you very much for having me. I'm Marie Argilagos, and yes, I'm President and CEO of Hispanics in Philanthropy, also affectionately known by many as HIP. And I've been the CEO for about 4 years now. Do you want me to talk a little bit about what we do?
Yes, please.
Great. So I think we have the name Philanthropy in our name, but we're not a foundation. We're really an umbrella of givers, donors of all sorts, small, big, that are working all across the Americas. And these might be folks that are professional givers, like foundation officers, but the vast majority are also what I call everyday givers, which are people that have a day job, but they understand that they want to contribute to the community. And so what we do is we aggregate and we leverage all of these dollars and we put them out for our community. So we see ourselves as a catalyst driving resources to the Latino global community, right? Because we have offices in Mexico, all across the US, in Puerto Rico, and then we're working across Central and South America. Given that Latinos are such a vibrant group of communities, it's been very important and dynamic work because we're vibrant, but at the same time, there's an urgent need for social change and for economic empowerment. As an example, here in the US, we receive really very small amounts of funding. It hasn't changed in 45 years. When you're looking at the funding that's coming from foundations, it's 1%. 45 years ago, you'll recall, we were like 6-7% of the community. So if you do the math, and everyone here is a tech person, so very math oriented, that means that the dollars are actually shrinking. And that's been of concern to us. So what we're doing as our collective corazón, our network, is basically trying to change that. My job is to assure that together we have a lot of impact. I hold personally the organization accountable. And what we're trying to do is democratize philanthropy, driving more and better resources, and really building power and influence wherever you stand or you sit. And that takes many shapes, like building leadership capacity of people who we hope will be at the table making decisions.
That's great. We're so lucky, so fortunate to have you in that role, given your background, having served at the Ford Foundation and the Annie Casey Foundation, and now at HIP. It's just great to see the organization under your leadership.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. I'm very proud of you. The theme for this week is Our Digital Future Accelerated. And over the last 2 years, the role of tech has drastically changed how we engage with and support communities. Can you share one personal or professional example that you've seen during this time?
Sure. Well, from the HIP, where I stand at HIP, what comes to mind, of course, is a COVID response and the funding that has been put out by the community. It's been so impressive. Latino communities were, as you all know, disproportionately impacted, everything from rates of infection, hospitalization to vaccine access. And of course, the economy. We lost thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs and so many small businesses. So that's going to take years and years to rebuild, which is why I like the word accelerated in the title, because we need to accelerate that. When we had the Great Recession back in 2009, it took, 8 years to rebuild that wealth, and we can't afford to take 8 years. We want to definitely shrink that. So in response to what's been happening, we've been doing so many different things, but I think to the end of this conversation is we've been also supporting organizations to build their digital capacities, to allow our grantees to navigate the transition in order so that they can do their work, achieve their mission, fundraise, convene. That looks it takes many different shapes. One example that was really big on our mind last year was census, for example, because we had been funding so that everybody would get counted. What happened? There was lots of investments into door knocking and people to people, and door knocking had to be switched overnight, basically, to digital engagement platforms. Another example would be adapting our Hip Give, which is our bilingual crowdfunding platform. It's been doing great, but again, how can we shift? And so we started to look at how do we merge crowdfunding and giving circles. Giving circles, those of you that are in California or here in New York or in Georgia, Denver, Arizona, there's lots of really vibrant, strong Latino giving circles, but they depend on high touch. And so inherently effective, but what happens when you can't touch? So our digital version of the giving circles makes it easier to set up and run a giving circle online. So it provides alternatives in a COVID world. And actually some people are finding that they like these alternatives better than the original. So we'll see what happens when all of this, when it comes to normal, although we don't know what normal will be. But this has all been a real test for our team to figure out how to respond to what the community, what our networks want. You have to remember that a lot of folks that are on the front lines are serving our community, but they're also impacted personally. Mm-hmm. And people forget that. And it's really important to remember that folks that are trying to serve and trying to push forward on the community front, and the same with essential workers, they're also experiencing the effects of the pandemic and of the recession. So it's been tough. It's been a tough 2 years.
I think those are all really powerful examples, and you're right. Those of us that are working in this space, you're working to serve clients or make sure that you're developing deeper relationships and best supporting your partners. But at the end of the day, we're personally impacted too. So thank you for acknowledging that. And
it's hard to divide yourself as a person.
It really is. It is. And just thinking about the examples that you gave around the census and having to figure out as well with the giving circles on taking this high touch environment digital, like those are big challenges. And so when I think about then my next question, which is about the role of public-private organizations, what does it look like in this space? Because right now in the audience today, you have business leaders from across roles and industries, but a huge tech presence, right? People who are part of or allies to the Latino community. So from your perspective, thinking about all that's transpired over the past 2 years, what is the role of public and private organizations in social impact?
That's a great question, and it's a exciting space that's changing. Like, for example, a lot of these companies that you're referring to, I mean, I'd love for us to be in person because many of them are B Corps, right? And the number of B Corps that's growing. And I think the ones that aren't B Corps are really understanding the power of corporate social responsibility. I've seen a fundamental shift in the past few years, looking at it just both from a consumer lens, but also from an employee lens. And everyone's demanding much more from the businesses that they support and the workplaces where they work. And superficial statements are being called out. And that's really important, because in the past you just had your press people write a nice statement, pretty words, but that's just not sufficient. So businesses are really looking at what is bold action and what is, where do we have accountability, and it's spanning everything from where we would expect it, like climate justice, but it's also, they're also looking at hard issues like equity, immigration, gun safety. And I was so excited to see even like voting rights, which in the past would have been not touchable, but even that, it has been something that businesses are addressing. And so that's really cool. Companies understand that they have to put their voice, their influence, their resources on the line. And the even better thing is that they get that it's not just a moral thing to do, the nice and right thing to do, but it makes business sense. And so that's great. I think what's really important is to make sure that as they're doing this, that they're doing it every step of the way with community, listening, and listening is interesting because it's not a check the box kind of thing. Listening is like real listening. You have to look at the degrees. So how are you listening? How are we bringing in? Who are you bringing to the table? And how do we assure that that's meaningful? And asking questions and asking about what's the long-term impact. I think these are the questions that will be setting aside those that are transactional and doing this for marketing purposes, which is very see-through, and those that are authentic. We've been working, for example, with Chobani, right? 30% of their employees are immigrants or refugees, including the CEO. And they're one of the most outspoken businesses. When you look at the refugee crisis across the world, whether it be in Syria or in Venezuela, they're on it. I love that. And guess what? That's the yogurt that I buy. It's delicious and it aligns with my values and my practice. So I think this is not just me. I'm sure you can point to some companies that you also frequent, Laura, because of that. In Washington, D.C., I think you're living in Washington, D.C. right now.
I
Shout out
am.
to Immigrant Food. Have you been there? It's
No, tell
a
me about it.
restaurant. It's right down the street from the White House. They launched when President Trump was president, and it was celebrating immigrants, right? When all immigrants were being detained at the border, and everything about immigrants was negative. They said, we're going to center our business model, which is about great food and drink and music, around gastro advocacy. I had never heard of that before. Fantastic. And many of us know other examples. Patagonia, for example, their actual tagline is "Climate crisis is our business," and they've self-imposed an earth tax, and that to provide nonprofits with working capital to defend our air, our land, our water, all around the globe. So these examples give cover and make it so much easier for other companies to do great things.
Well, wow, those are all really, really great examples. And my brother's in town, so we're probably going to go check out Immigrant Food tonight. Thank you for the recommendation. And as I think about, again, just the public-private partnership opportunities, we're really proud. Google and Google.org are proud to partner with HIP on specific initiatives. Could you talk to us a little bit about your startup economy and wealth generation work, and maybe share a bit more about how the Power Up Fund is structured to support Latinx startups and founders?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. We're actually expanding that body of work. Why? It's because, I gave you numbers before about 1% of philanthropy, and that's just not okay. Well, it's also just not okay that we have 4.4 million Latinx owned businesses in the US. They contribute $700 billion to the economy each year. Yet they receive less than 2% of venture capital or angel investments, right? That's just like, the system is messed up. And so what we're trying to do is level the playing field so that we can build Latinx wealth by giving entrepreneurs of color the same opportunities as their counterparts so that they can grow at the same rate. And so there's 3 pillars to this approach. The first is Initio Ventures. Initio is our arm that invests in Latinx startups. Second, we have our Latinx Launchpad, which is basically our pitch competition. Those of you that have been following HIP would know it as the Tiburon Tank. So it's just gotten a new branding. But either way, what it's doing is really searching out and putting the spotlight on Latinx startup leaders and making sure that that pipeline is larger. And then the coolest thing that we've done lately is a fellowship program, because we know that there are not enough Latinx fund managers. And so this is our new fellowship program, which is part of the startup economy, which we're excited about. We have our first cohort right now, and we'll be recruiting our second cohort for January. So I'd love for you, folks that know folks that are interested in being fund managers to apply. That will be great. But so that means that the Power Up Fund, which is what you're familiar with, Laura, will continue, and that's the cash assistance to Latino businesses. But there's an opportunity also to do these equity investments. So Power Up, let me back up, started in 2018, and that was with Google. I need to give you guys a shout out, because it was where we piloted a cohort of cash assistance grants to Latinx entrepreneurs. For us, it was crazy because we've been investing, we've done about $75 million in grants, but it's always been to nonprofits, right, over the years. And so this was our opportunity to pivot and to start investing or providing cash assistance grants to Latino entrepreneurs and enterprises. That was in Puerto Rico, Los Angeles, and Miami. By 2022, when COVID started, we ramped that up. And then we started working also in Alapata, in Los Angeles, El Paso, and with Google.org's assistance, we reached over 500 small businesses in these states during really difficult times. This builds them out, and it's really helped us also build a pipeline of Latino businesses that are really strong, and it shows us that there are just so many. But what we did now in 2021, to wrap up the story, is we started up a startup economy and wealth generation work, and that's where Initio Ventures, which is the newest part, and that's really about building wealth. Why are we doing that? We need to, if we want more philanthropists and more people we need more disposable income, right? So we need to build wealth. So Initio Ventures is investing early stage impact investments to Latinx founders, also across markets and across states and industries. So these investments are really exciting for us, because we're hoping that we can scale their businesses and really bring more life to this, to the traditional way of vetting, which is what we see in Wall Street, which is in a little box. What we're doing, our approach goes far beyond what I think happens normally, and we're considering life experience of entrepreneurs. We're measuring the potential of their startup. We're encouraging them to really take DEI and talent and strategies into the fabric of their business from the very beginning. And let's see, in terms of the structure, we're using a donor advised fund for those of you that follow these kind of things. And so what we're doing is accepting an aggregated charitable donations for the investments. We've done to date 3. Sorry, hold on just a second. Maybe I'm talking too much. I get excited.
No, please go right ahead.
So this year, since we launched the equity side, we've done 3 investments into Latin-owned and Latin-led enterprises. AirPals, Shop Latinx, which was amazing, because Shop Latinx got, with our support, then they were able to raise $1 million. This is huge. Even though $1 million doesn't sound big for companies, there's only 35 Latinas that have ever raised that much money as entrepreneurs. Yeah. And we'll be announcing the 3rd next week, and we'll have a 4th in December. So lots is happening. I'd love for folks to follow our launch pads and the fellowship. And yeah, we're proud. We're excited.
It's exciting to see how much this has grown since 2018, you said. That's huge progress. And I mentioned that you have an announcement coming up next week. It would be great if we could share it with the larger high-tech community. So please make sure that we have
We
access.
started after Hurricane Maria. That's how this all started. Because those of you that are familiar with Puerto Rico, after Hurricane Maria, you saw how the economy was gutted. And so we needed to figure out how we could help contribute, again, not just with the first responders and essential workers and the nonprofits, which were doing amazing work, but also jumpstart an economy that had over the years, because of so many issues, had been really, the small businesses were gutted. But a lot of young Puerto Ricans who were on the mainland wanted to go back and wanted to help. And those that were there, there was this one guy, Juan, I forget his last name, who is a tech guy, right? And he developed this amazing app because the restaurants, in San Juan needed food, fresh food, and the farmers needed to get their food down to the cities. And then the taxi drivers, there was no tourism, so they were looking for work. So through his app, he was able to connect folks so that we could get the food to the restaurants and to the groceries, and get the tax. So everybody won. And so that's when we started working with Parallel 18 and Grupo Guayacán and understanding the power of investing in businesses. And from there it grew. I just have an amazing board. And they saw the power in being able to grow this type of work. So
that's an incredible story. I had an opportunity to go to Puerto Rico. It was probably about 9 months after Hurricane Maria had hit, and went with Hispanic Federation and Mercy Corps. Hector Mujica from .org, a bunch of us went down to get a sense of what was actually happening on the ground, and working with small businesses who were trying to transition online, so providing digital skills training. So it's wonderful to hear you talk about this app and the work that you all have been doing, because I know that there's still so much need there. I'd like to shift just a little bit. I think that the topic of today was titled 1 Year Later, and certainly a lot can change in 1 year. And you've given us a bunch of examples of things that you've worked on during this time. So where I want to shift is, a lot can happen in 1 year, but a year is actually not a lot of time when we're talking about community effort. It takes a lot of time to see meaningful shifts, meaningful impacts. How do you manage that reality against corporate partner expectations?
Whoa, well, I think what's really important for everybody to be grounded in the fact that you don't get to systems change in 1 year. You won't get it to it in 1 year. You won't get it to it in 5 years. Oftentimes it takes a decade or even a generation. And to see the lasting difference, you have to be willing to go past stockholder profits and really think about the community in a different way, so that you also have to realize that not everything is quantifiable. How do you measure social capital? I was having dinner with a guy from the New School yesterday, and he was saying that, even in, for instance, he was looking at different neighborhoods that you would not consider wealthy neighborhoods, that you would consider, vulnerable or marginalized communities. And even there's some that are doing better than others. And he started looking, and it was because of the social capital that has been built. And so the qualitative data and the quantitative data, and how do you really look at that and be willing to see and to accept that this qualitative data is rigorous enough, and is sufficient, because we impose our own theories of change and our own metrics, and that doesn't work anytime. It never works. So that's what we talked about earlier, really centering the community and centering listening, so that we can then understand the realities of what's happening. And in these times, for example, the COVID pandemic, keeping that in mind. If you really want equity, that's what you need to focus on.
Mm-hmm. That's something we spend a lot of time talking about at Google, that the systemic level work that needs to happen. So thank you for raising that. For this audience of business leaders, share with us where corporate leaders can add the most value. Let's think like outside of funding. What is the opportunity for and where is the opportunity for corporate partners to do more?
Well, I mean, outside of funding, ideation is so important. And you can do that either as a board member. I mean, our board members are incredible thought partners, and that's a formal role. But a lot of nonprofits and grassroots organizations are also looking for advisors. So it doesn't have to be a formal role where you're going, we have fiduciary responsibility. Just helping in the generation of ideas is so important. That co-strategizing, how can we collectively think about things, whether it be financial sustainability or it be some kind of a marketing campaign, or how we were talking about earlier, how organizations had to pivot. How do we pivot? It's really important to be able to tap those that have bigger eyes, because sometimes we're in our own spaces and it's hard to like see outside of our space. So more and more nonprofits have to run like businesses, and so it's really that cross fertilization is really great. Like there's also formal programs, executives on loan, but all this thought partnership and cross fertilization, so that you're working across the sectors. I think that's a just to me logical way outside of funding. So volunteering your time and your talent.
Great.
And we all have nonprofits in our communities. Everybody does.
Absolutely, absolutely. So to the high tech community listening, volunteer your time and ideas. And I think there's certainly a lot of room for space there and opportunity as we go into to this giving season. Um, I'd like to chat a little bit about sustained commitment, right? When you have a corporate partner that comes to the table to work with you, um, how critical is sustained commitment to the success of your work, and what does sustained commitment look like?
Shout out to organizations like American Express and Southwest. I would call them sustained commitments. Um, they have changes of CEOs, of upper management, and but the commitment is there. It might change, but commitments the commitment is still there, and we know that we can count on them. if, Even if the grant goes away, they are still partners in ideating. That's what I really appreciate. Sometimes organizations are like, "Ooh, we can't fund you," so they like go away because they feel like money is like what's most important. Money is really important. It opens a lot of doors, right? We were able to have like the Mackenzie Scott gift that we received that opened a lot of doors, but having the opportunities to ideate is just as important, and sustains the relationships through ups and downs, because everybody's budget changes, and we all understand that. So yes, maybe one year you have money and so you are able to offer money. One year you don't have money and then you're not able to offer that. And but as long as there's still a relationship there, and there's lots of ways also to meet nonprofits where they are. Maybe you can't offer the same big grant, but maybe you can do a small membership, or you can buy a table at at their event, or even $25. I mean, just being keeps you at the table. So just stay at the table no matter what, and don't shy away just because you can't do these big grants.
That's great.
I would say that that's it, really important, because the instinct is like, I can't fund you, so I'm going to go leave the tape, and that doesn't help.
So it sounds like there are a variety of ways to get involved, and even if you're a first-time partner, right, you can start off small and grow the relationship over time. We have a question from an audience member, Ana Marie. How can the high tech Familia help you in your mission?
Oh, for us, well, fantastic. I would say the Power Up Fund and the Initio Venture Fund are both ways for high tech, because many of the, well, not so much in Power Up, because that's the SMBs, the small minority businesses. So that's the taquerias, the grocery, the bodega, the beauty parlor. But in terms of Initio, our venture fund, that is very much tech companies by and far. And what we're offering them is not just the resources and the investment, but coaching is a huge part of what we're offering as well. So being part of helping us in terms of coaching, also look at our fellows. The fellows that are going through our programs are brilliant. And so bring them on after they finish with HIP. Maybe you might want to bring them on board as well. I'd love for you all to take a look. It's powerupfund.org, and you can see more there. But that would be one way that I think makes sense. And those of you that are inspired by the type of startups and founders that we are investing in, people that like you were, maybe 2, 5, 10 years ago, maybe you want to lend a couple dollars so that we can invest in these, right? Because the donor advice fund is charitable donations. And so anybody can invest in the Power Up Fund or in the Initio Fund. And that's money that we put right into the company. So that's another way that would be potentially.
On the Initio Fund, assuming that like the high tech community hears your call and comes forward with additional support, where do you see the fund going in the next 10 years? What would additional funds go to support? What would that look like?
Well, this is our first year. We're first up right now. And so we're doing 5 companies this year. We're hoping to do at least 12 next year. And then going forward, increasing that, as much money as we have, we'll put out. With the Power Up Fund, we started with Google dollars. That inspired our board to, match those dollars. And so our board from our reserves put in $3 million. And so we're looking for other dollars to add. We want to raise $5 million altogether for next year to put out into the startup, these founders. And they're brilliant. It's just amazing what they're doing. And if we had more money, we would definitely fund more. What's happening is that since we have this problem of not enough Latinx fund managers, we don't have enough folks that are investing in our community, and there are so many, so many.
Thank you for sharing that. We've seen a shift, particularly over the last year or so, following the racial reckoning of last summer, of holding companies more accountable for how they show up for communities. How has that shift rippled to your engagement with corporate funders? Have you seen a shifting in priorities of where people really want to be spending their time and efforts, or is it just people want to be doing more of everything? I'm just curious to see what that has looked like from your perspective.
That's hard to answer. Yes, there's been a shift, mostly trending in the right direction. But remember we were talking about accountability earlier and public statements. Well, there was a Washington Post article, and that Washington Post article pointed to, I think it was like $45 billion, for example, in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, being pledged or committed by corporations to address DEI. Well, that sounds all great and wonderful. But when you unpack those dollars, and I need to give credit to my colleague, Laura Marquez at the Philanthropic Partnership for Racial Equity, she unpacked those dollars with assistance from Candid, which is the foundation, used to be the Foundation Center and Guide Stars. So they're the ones that do a lot of the unpacking of the data and really looking at what's the real accountability. And of that 45 billion, I don't know the numbers in front of me, but I think it's about 3.5 billion, right? So dramatically fewer dollars have actually gone out to the organizations, the nonprofits on the ground that I think, based on the slanting and the messaging, we thought they were going to go out to. Much of those dollars were actually used internally for very important things like, putting in place infrastructure, processes to have stronger, more rigorous DEI accountability and processes. But Some of it hasn't gone out. It's maybe over a much longer term, and it didn't give us that impression. So this kind of stuff worries me. The good thing is that there's better data and tracking, so we can track it and we can start calling. People are not scared to call it out anymore, and so you can't just put false pledges out there. You will be called out, and I think the more we do that, then corporations will understand that they have to put the correct pledges and the correct numbers, and they can't wing it anymore. So that's a big change that I'm seeing, and it's a good and long overdue.
Absolutely. I mean, we've made big pledges around our commitment to racial equity and working really hard to hold ourselves accountable to what we have committed, and that goes for workforce representation and racial equity. And I'll just say really quickly on the dollars that go into DEI internally. For Google in particular, it's incredibly important that we make sure that we're building our workforce in the right way so that it's reflective of America. It impacts the way that our products are built and our platforms, our systems. So we certainly want to make sure that we're putting our efforts on internal workforce representation, doing that in the right way. And we report out on it. We work hard to be transparent, report out on it through our diversity annual report. And then on our racial equity commitments that we made last summer, our CDO, our Chief Diversity Officer, Melanie Parker, actually, she just published a blog on this last week. So we're making regular updates on our commitments and just share a few quick things that I'm really proud of here. But we're just doing some incredible work with HBCUs and HSIs to help support the next generation of creators, makers, and technologists, and we're working to build products that work for all users. So I'm sure you saw the announcement from last month that we launched the Pixel 6 with an improved camera, and so it's got this something that we call real tone. It allows us to power images with more brightness and depth and details across skin tones. So you need a strong employee base and individuals that are really committed to product inclusion in order to create things like that. And then I'll just say the last thing about the work that we've been doing is to continue to provide opportunities for economic advancement through digital skills training and workforce training for Latino job seekers and small businesses. And so it really is, it's part of our company-wide commitment to DEI, and the transparency, I think, is an important part of the piece.
You guys are definitely one of the good actors and the ones that we model and want to give shout outs to. Tell me about that blog. Is it public? Can we find it?
It is. You can find it. I don't actually have the link up right now, but if you Google Melanie Parker racial equity blog, you can find it and read more about the work that we've been doing over this past year. It really has been incredible to just see employees across the company and our leaders working together to think about how we support small businesses, entrepreneurs, job seekers. You saw the video just ahead of this, our talk on the CS First work that we've been doing in schools and working with teachers and students. That one I'm particularly proud about, and just so proud to see the work continue to grow.
That's cool. That's really cool. The report that I was mentioning before it's called Mismatched, and that's I'd love for folks then to look at the blog that Melanie wrote and also the Mismatched report, because that shows the mismatch between the monies that were committed or pledged and what's actually come out. So there's, I guess, two good pieces of homework for our audience to go back to.
Great. Yeah, I see that the blog has just been shared in the chat with for the audience, and perhaps if we could put the Mismatched article in there as well. I think it's important, this issue, the issues around transparency and accountability, and we certainly want to hold ourselves accountable to what we've committed to from our end. What are some best practices, some lessons learned that you've seen in the DEI space over the years, especially when it comes to the idea of transparency and accountability?
Well, if I might be a little controversial, I think thinking about not like erasing the deep and thinking about the equity and inclusion, because D is the diversity piece, and a lot of times that's supposed to be the entry point, but a lot of times people get stuck with the diversity, and that just means that you have a whole bunch of other voices in the room, but that doesn't mean that those voices are being listened to, that they have agency. Um, and so I talk about equity and inclusion because that then assumes that we have the diversity. After all, our country is that. And then it allows us to focus on two things, which are two hard things: the equity and inclusion, or inclusion and equity, whichever order you want to go in. But to me, the companies that have made that leap and focused on equity and inclusion um, are have been more successful because they're then able to concentrate our very limited resources and our times into where there's going to have the most ripple effects and the most impact. And we're all about impact, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, Sorry, I was just toggling between screens, so just give me a second to find you again. Yeah, impact. Obviously, that's what we're all aiming for in this day and age. As I think about, like, I want to talk a little bit more about, I guess, the partnership that we've had with you, Ana Marie, and as we think about how does that evolve over time, and the role that our employees can play in this process. Earlier, you talked about ideation, but I'd love to hear more about what that process has been like for you and the ideation phase with the work that you've been doing with .org, and how you think that can evolve over time.
Well, I think the ideation, it means that there's no bad ideas, right? And so you start with where is it that we all want to see long-term impact and systems change, and then you put that at the center, and then you co-strategize as to how we can collectively get there. So, and then it's important to also figure out what are the gaps. So, for example, the google.org partnership that we had, it was clear that HIP had the mechanism to recruit the companies and do the cash assistance, but that we needed a partner to provide the coaching and the mentoring. So we brought in Eureka. So figure out, don't try and do everything, figure out who else needs to be at the table. And that really made us stronger to have that type of partnership. And when you see the faces, there's a great video, we don't have it today, but the video of the businesses of getting, when they get the call, that they're getting the dollars. It's so impressive. Like, I'm here in Brooklyn, and I was looking at what, the guys from Urban Barbers, they were able to survive because of our partnership, because they were able to get the PPE supplies that otherwise they couldn't have functioned. We had also Brooklyn Cupcakes, those of you that are into cupcakes. They were able to actually secure a commercial kitchen so that they could take advantage of the holiday sales. And another Queens Latino, he was able to expand coverage of local issues and through their digital strategy. So all of these things, no one company, if it was just me sitting down with my team, I wouldn't be able to have that coverage of barbers and cupcakes and a digital newsletter. It takes all of us to be able to figure out what are the anchor institutions, whether they be formal or informal, in our different communities. So I think that it's sitting at the table and ideating, and really thinking about what is it that we want, and including the voices.
And are there gaps? Are there big gaps that you see?
Yeah, the gaps are, even though we are 18-20% of the population, there's this, to borrow from our colleagues, mismatch of capital. And what's happening in the philanthropic world, that's echoed by the government world, it's echoed by capital markets. It's a lack of investment in our communities. And so, yeah, there's huge gaps. And given that we are at, 1 and 2%, even if we said, like we're talking about 10x for Latinx, even if we grew 1% a year so that we have 10x instead of 1% in 10 years, we're still in 10 years, we're going to be way underrepresented in terms of the resources coming to our community. So how do we bridge that gap? We have to think in terms of really creatively, so that each dollar is not worth $1, but is worth 2 or 3.
Thank you. We have another audience question. From your perspective, what are the things that will remain constant in regards to diversity and inclusion?
Well, I think human beings by nature gravitate to what they understand and know and feel comfortable with. So we will forever have to be making efforts to understand those that are the other, that are not like us. And some of us have the privilege of being able to be in very diverse communities, but there's still others that are not like us. And so how do you constantly push yourself and and allow yourself to feel uncomfortable when you're in new places and new experiences that are not similar to what you're used to? And then ask yourself questions, and always assume good intentions. It's very easy for us to go into like, what was the assumption, but always assume good intentions. And I think that gets you into a really good place.
Well, we're very close to time, and I have 2 more questions for you.
Ooh.
So hopefully we have 3 minutes left. So I think we can squeeze both of these in. The first one is, we have a bunch of Latina executives on the call. And as a Latina leader, someone who has stepped into a CEO position, what advice would you have for these women, Latinas, who are looking to grow their careers and step into larger executive roles? Like what was that experience like for you, taking over as the CEO of HIP? And maybe let me just reframe the question a little bit. What advice would you have to yourself as someone who is just about to step into that position, looking back on that moment in time now?
Sure. Don't be afraid to ask for help and advice. Laura, you and I are part of like the Latina collective, networks, and being able to ask advice when you need advice, or just say, how's everyone doing? And, get a pat on the back. These things you can't talk about it as much. I mean, it's so important, and I can't undersell how important it is. So just make sure that you have a network of people that are caring and that are going to give you that support. I think self-care, we sometimes think that if we work harder, more, it's important so that people will notice, but you also have to do self-care, because if you self-implode, then nothing, it was all for naught. So really pay attention to self-care and balance your networks, and just be a real good person, because what you put out there also comes back. During a lifetime of like, when you're working 30, 40 years, it all comes back around. And all this network that you're building, these people that have been in your space, they will continue to be in your space. And so it's important that that you pay attention to what you're leaving behind and around you. Don't just go without evaluating the consequences of what you're doing.
That's really beautiful. Last question. We're approaching the season of giving, really, here in the U.S. What is one thing that you think each of us could do before the end of the year to support communities in those most in need?
Sure. It should be the season of giving all year round. But given that it's around Giving Tuesday, and that's the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, let's make it happen then. And the rest of them, we have Giving Tuesday, we have Latinx Give. So I'd love for everybody to support just one organization that you feel very, committed to, and make sure that they know that you love them. It's been a hard year for nonprofits. So many have had their budgets cut, and they're doing more with a lot less. So yes, give. You can do it through HipGive, which is our giving platform. You could do it through so many different platforms, but the important thing is that you reach out to your nonprofits, and they make your communities vibrant and work, and they often do it without anybody applauding them. And so just make sure that your nonprofits in your community know that you appreciate the work that they do.
Okay, we all have our call to action. Ana Marie, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's so good to see you. I can't wait to see you again in person.
Likewise.
And just best of luck to you for the remainder of the year.
Thank you. Thank you. So go to our website. It's either hipgive.org or powerupfund.org. And just keep in touch with Hispanics in Philanthropy. And we're at hiponline.org.
Great. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.